Welcome to Myth Madness. Last episode, I covered the tragic tale of Seyavash. He was a prince of Persia, and truly the best example of a prince Persia could hope for. He was righteous, wise, well-trained, and highly skilled. If only he had become king after the reign of the foolish but long-lived Kay Khosrow. But it was not to be, and the remainder of the Shahnameh epic poem is haunted by that single question: what if? What if Seyavash had lived? The tragedy began when a handsome, adult Seyavash returned to live in his father's palace, and his stepmother, Sudebe, was consumed with lust for him. Seyavash turned her down, and she responded by trying to make his life terrible. A wedge grew between him and his father Kay Kavus. Eventually, Seyavash fled to Turan and married Afrasiab's daughter. Joining his father's enemy was certainly a strange decision, and innocent Seyavash was not ready to deal with the intrigue of Afrasiab's court. Afrasiab became suspicious of Seyavash, and this feeling grew worse until he decided to destroy the Persian prince. Seyavash was executed, and the city he built was left to be reclaimed by the wilderness. But Seyavash's wife, Feragis, was pregnant. When you kill a father, you must always fear revenge from his son. Afrasiab knew this. He ordered his men to drag Feragis, his own daughter, through the streets and beat her until she miscarried. A truly evil act. The order was too much for Afrasiab's advisor, Turan. He intervened, convinced Afrasiab to show mercy to Feragis, and secured the king's permission to take Feragis back to his own castle, make her comfortable, and tell the king when his daughter gave birth. If he still wanted to destroy Seyavash's child, he could do so then. This episode will continue from that point. It will cover how Turan raised the boy and how he came to eventually return to Iran. But first, a quick reminder about an important concept in Persian mythology: far. Far is commonly translated as glory, fortune, or radiance. Starting with Gayamart, the mythological kings I've talked about so far were all said to possess far. It was a blessing granted to them by the Creator and showed they had a right to rule Iran. They glowed with this blessing, something like halos in Christian art. However, this is only a superficial understanding of far. The word is more properly translated as fulfilling one's own work. It was not simply a supernatural glowing granted to someone because the Creator liked them or that they had the right ancestors. Far came with responsibilities, and having it granted to you meant you were completing the very specific duties that came from your social position as king. When kings did not do this, their far was said to have dimmed. So, unjust kings not only lost their legitimacy in the eyes of their followers, they also lost legitimacy in a very visual way from the Creator himself. Kay Khosrow is an interesting example. In many of these Persian legends, he is shown to be a fool. He often gets himself into trouble, his vassals grumble about his behavior, and his rule of Iran would probably be challenged if it weren't for Rostam constantly coming to save the day. However, while a fool, Kay Khosrow is always a just, generous king. His mistakes aside, he performs his proper function, and so his blessing from the Creator, his far, remains. The closest he comes to losing it is when he has a throne built to allow him to tour the heavens. But after this fails, he goes into seclusion and prays to the Creator for forgiveness, and so restores his far. However, the bad business with his son Seyavash changes things. Having far is also linked to the king's will to rule. Seyavash's self-exile and later death left Kay Khosrow a broken man, his far dimmed. The nobles needed to find an heir, and it needed to be someone who possessed the Creator's blessing. And on that note, let's return to Turan and explore what happened after Turan saved Feragis from her cruel father, Afrasiab. According to the Shahnameh, Turan brought Feragis to his home in Khotan to be looked after by his wife Gulshar. There, one moonless night when all men and animals were sleeping, Piran dreamed about Seyavash. In the dream, the hero held a sword and stood next to a bright candle. He told Piran to wake up. Tonight, Seyavash's son, Kay Khosrow, would be born. When Piran awoke, he and Gulshar ran to check on Ferraghis, only to find that she had already given birth. The baby was large. He looked more like a 1-year-old than a newborn. Seeing the child, Piran wept for his fallen friend Seyavash and cursed the cruelty of King Afrasiab. He swore that he would not hand Kay Khosrow over to the king of Turan, even if he was tortured, even if he was devoured by lions and dogs. Piran went to Afrasiab and told him about the child, as he had told the king he would do so when he took Ferraghis into his home. By this time, Afrasiab had begun to feel guilty about what had happened to Seyavash. Afrasiab told Piran he had heard of a prophecy. The oracles said that a child descended from both Tur, the founder of Turan, and Kay Kawad, a previous king of Iran, would be a great king that all of the cities of Turan would pay homage to. Afrasiab told Piran that there was no sense in worrying about this. This was fate. Nevertheless, Afrasiab believed Kay Khosrow was this prophesied child. It would be best if Kay Khosrow was raised by shepherds instead of palace courtiers, and grew up not knowing who he was or why he was there. After the meeting, Piran left the palace happy. No longer did he curse Afrasiab, but instead praised his wisdom and righteousness. Piran took the baby to the local shepherds and told them to look after him. Time passed. By the age of 7, it was clear Kay Khosrow was no normal boy. He made his own bow from a branch and hunted game alone in the woods. When he was 10, he fought against vicious bears, boars, wolves, leopards, and lions. He developed a rebellious streak and no longer listened to what the shepherds told him. So his carer complained to Piran, asking him to come see the boy. When Piran arrived, he hugged the boy. Khosrow was taken aback. He did not expect this great lord Piran to be kind and willing to embrace a lowly shepherd's son. Piran blushed and told Khosrow he was no shepherd. He said he would reveal more if Khosrow came back to Piran's castle. So Piran raised Khosrow in his own home, but all that time he still feared the wrath of Afrasiab. Years passed, and one day Afrasiab summoned Piran to his palace. When Piran arrived, Afrasiab admitted he felt bad about the child of Seyavash and how it was wrong to send him to live with shepherds. If the boy could forget the past, Afrasiab would let him live and be happy. But if he showed signs of being a problem for Turan, the king would not hesitate to execute him, just like what happened with Seyavash. Piran hurried home to bring Kay Khosrow to see the king. Piran knew that if Khosrow was to survive, Afrasiab could not view him as a threat. He told Khosrow to act like a fool. If Afrasiab asked about battles, Khosrow should talk about something completely different, like banquets. When Afrasiab saw Khosrow, he saw how large he had become, and how he possessed the royal splendor of the Creator's blessing. Piran noticed how the king looked closely at the youth, and grew worried for Khosrow. But when the king began his interview, Piran quickly relaxed. First, Afrasiab asked about life as a shepherd. Khosrow replied that he had no bow, no arrows, and did not go hunting. Afrasiab asked about his teachers, and Khosrow said people were scared of leopards. Afrasiab asked about Khosrow's parents and about Iran. Khosrow said a dog could not defeat a lion. Afrasiab laughed and told Piran it was clear Khosrow's mind was scrambled, and no man planning revenge would act this way. He said Khosrow could be sent to live with his mother Ferraghis, and if they wanted they could even move to live in Seyavash Guard, Seyavash's old city, as long as bad men were kept away from them. With this victory won, Piran hurried Khosrow out of the palace, before Afrasiab noticed anything amiss. He loaded Kay Khosrow with treasures, and everything he would need, and then sent him with his mother to Seyavash Guard. By this time, Seyavash Guard was an abandoned rubble, overgrown with thorny bushes. But when Ferraghis and Kay Khosrow arrived, all of the local people and even the animals too came out to pay homage to their rightful lord. The ground revived, and weeds turned into lush green trees. In the winter it stayed like spring, and everyone mourned the loss of Seyavash together. Far away in Persia, the warrior Gudars dreamed. In it, the angelic being Sorush rode in on a cloud. Sorush told Gudars that there was a new prince in Turan. Kay Khosrow was the son of Seyavash, and if he was brought to Persia, he would put on his royal belt and raise the land of Turan to avenge his father. But where in Turan was this prince? Sorush wouldn't say. He only said that Gudars's oldest son, Giv, was the only man who could find him. The following morning, Gudars summoned Giv and told him about his dream. Giv accepted the task and swore to attempt it alone. His bow, lasso, and horse were the only companions he needed. He would wander through dry plains and steep mountains and see where his path took him. Feeling a sense of wonder at his strange fate, Giv saddled his horse and rode off. Watching him go, Gudars could not help his tears. He feared he would never see his brave son again. It was not long before Giv arrived at the border with Turan. Besides traveling alone, to keep his mission secret, he spoke the local language. But he also went further, taking more extreme measures. Giv asked people if they knew about Kay Khosrow. If they didn't, he killed them, dragged their body away, and buried it in an unmarked grave. For 7 years, Giv continued this frankly insane behavior, searching for any news of Kay Khosrow, killing as he went, drinking nothing but brackish water from local streams, and eating nothing but wild donkeys and picked herbs. One day, Giv arrived at the edge of a grove of trees. He dropped for rest next to the nearby stream. He was not in a good mood, and he wondered if a Div, demons, had given that dream to his father so long ago to make mischief. While Giv was wandering aimlessly around Turan, his friends were back in Persia, fighting battles and feasting. He got up and continued along the stream bed, feeling sorry for himself, until finally he looked up to see a handsome young man sitting on a throne. Giv saw the man was bestowed with far, radiating brightly, and ran towards him, asking if he was the long-sought son of Seyavash. The young man was indeed Kay Khosrow, and he in turn recognized Giv, son of Gudars, having heard tales of the Persian hero from his mother Fergis. However, Giv still needed proof, so Kay Khosrow showed him the birthmark on his arm that Seyavash and all members of the Kayanid royal line possessed. Overjoyed, the two men set off, chatting about Rostam, Kay Kavus, and others. Giv told Kay Khosrow about Gudars's dream, and Kay Khosrow in turn asked about Giv's 7 years in the wilderness. Giv told Kay Khosrow that the loss of Kay Kavus' son Seyavash had left the king of Persia weak. His far was diminished, and these were dark days for Iran. They eventually arrived at Seyavash Guard and joined Fergis. She pointed out that they needed to flee to Iran straight away. If Afrasiab heard that a Persian warrior had appeared, Piran's tricks would fall apart, and Afrasiab would feel threatened by Kay Khosrow and come to kill him. Fergis worried this was only a matter of time. Turan was the home of the evil spirit Ahriman, and the place teemed with Persia's enemies. But first, she said, Kay Khosrow needed a horse. Fergis told him there was a herd of horses in a nearby pasture. One of them was a horse named Bayzad, who originally belonged to Kay Khosrow's father Seyavash. When Seyavash died, Bayzad went wild and had never let another person ride him again. Fergis said Kay Khosrow should show Bayzad Seyavash's old saddle, gently stroke him by hand, and then show the horse his face. Bayzad would recognize Khosrow as the son of his old owner, and surely allow him to ride. Giv and Kay Khosrow went to the meadow and followed Fergis's instructions. When Kay Khosrow finally sat atop Bayzad, the horse reared up and galloped away like the wind. As he watched horse and rider disappear, Giv grew worried. He wondered if it had all been a trick, if Ahriman had taken the form of a horse and was now taking Kay Khosrow galloping to his death. But it turned out fine. Give caught up to a laughing Kay Khosrow, and the two of them, and Behzad, returned to Ferraghis. Back at Seyavash Guard, Ferraghis took Give to the treasury. She told Give to look through it and take whatever he wanted as reward for all the trials he had overcome over the past 7 years. Give chose to take Seyavash's old armor, as well as some other small trinkets. When he was done, Ferraghis put on a helmet, and all three of them began their journey to Persia. They tried to keep their journey secret, but it didn't last for long. Gossip spread far and wide, and finally someone went to Piran and told him the warrior Give had come and taken Kay Khosrow and Ferraghis back to Iran. Piran was saddened by this news. As long as Kay Khosrow stayed in Turan, he was no threat to the kingdom. But if Seyavash's son returned to Persia, the danger to Turan would be impossible to ignore. Piran questioned the fitness of Afrasiab, but his loyalty to Turan still burned like the shining sun. No matter how much he liked him, Kay Khosrow must be stopped, innocent young man or not. Piran ordered 300 horsemen to chase after the three travelers. He told its 2 captains to impale Give on a spear, bury Ferraghis in the ground, and bring Kay Khosrow back in chains. Meanwhile, Khosrow, Ferraghis, and Give stopped to camp for the night. When Ferraghis and Khosrow slept, Give sat up and kept watch. He heard the Turanians' approaching hooves, drew his sword, and ran down the road. He fought his enemies in a rage, and killed so many the survivors ran away. Give returned to the camp covered in blood, but Khosrow, Ferraghis, and Give knew that Give had only delayed their pursuit. They broke camp and hurried on. By this time, Piran had learned of his men's failure. He now gathered 1,000 men and led them himself after the fugitives. Piran's force reached a deep river. On the other side, Khosrow, Give, and Ferraghis had made their camp. This time Ferraghis was keeping watch. She saw the horsemen arrive on the opposite bank and woke up Give to warn him. Give told Ferraghis and Khosrow to go hide on a nearby mountainside while he fought the Turanian soldiers like before. But Khosrow objected. He wanted to fight Piran's army too. Give talked the young man out of this. Give said he was one of 78 brothers, whereas there was only one Khosrow. If Khosrow died, there would be no one to take the Persian crown. Kay Khosrow relented, and so Give went out to fight the Turanians alone. He called out to speak with Piran, and the two warriors exchanged insults until Give coaxed Piran into the river and away from his army. Give slowly led Piran further and further away, until he suddenly turned around and looped his lasso around Piran's neck, pulling him from his horse and tied him up. Give went back and attacked the leaderless army, driving the cowardly warriors away. His work now done, Give pulled Piran to their camp and suggested they execute him for the murder of Seyavash. But Ferraghis and Khosrow knew that Piran was not to blame for Seyavash's death, and had in fact gone to great lengths to make sure Khosrow survived. They should free him. Give replied he could not let Piran escape unharmed. Rightly or wrongly, he had sworn to turn the ground red with Piran's blood. To compromise and keep everyone's honor intact, Give was allowed to cut Piran's ear with his dagger. The blood dripped to the ground, and the trio allowed Piran to ride away, bound to his horse, after he promised that only his wife Gulshar would untie him. After that, Give, Ferraghis, and Khosrow finally reached the Oxus River, the border between Persia and Turan. They had almost reached their destination at this point, but then they got into a heated argument with the ferryman. They asked for a boat worthy to carry Kay Khosrow, but the ferryman didn't know who Kay Khosrow was, and he certainly didn't care either. A fee was still a fee, and it didn't matter who you were, as long as you paid it. Give, by now impatient, told the ferryman they would pay, but he needed to hurry as Afrasiab's army was after them. You see, by now Piran would have returned home and alerted Afrasiab to Kay Khosrow's flight. This was not a good detail to share during a price negotiation. The ferryman said that if they were fugitives, they would need to pay extra. He would only accept either Khosrow's armor, crown, his horse Behzad, or Ferraghis herself as payment. This demand only infuriated Give all the more. He told Khosrow to forget the ferryman. With far like his, Khosrow should be able to cross the river with no trouble himself. With Give's encouragement, Khosrow urged his horse into the rushing water, with Give and Ferragus following after on their own horses. The ferryman was amazed to watch them cross to the other side of Iran, without boats, the water swirling around them but never going over their horses' heads. It wasn't a moment's too soon either. Afrasiab's army arrived on the opposite banks. The king of Turan wanted to cross over into Persia and chase after them, but one of his captains, Human, convinced the king to stay in Turan. They did not want to start a full-fledged invasion at this point. Now safely in Persia, Give led the group to his father's castle in Isfahan. When Gudar saw his son for the first time in 7 years, he burst into tears and bowed down low to Kay Khosrow. From Isfahan, the party, now including Gudar's and a number of other Persian nobles, traveled to Kay Kavus's palace. Kay Kavus welcomed Khosrow, and as they walked through his private garden, the king asked him about his life in Turan, and Khosrow told the king everything Give had done on their adventure. Kay Khosrow was also welcomed to the palace by a hero named Keshvad, who was Gudar's father and Give's grandfather. In Kay Kavus's rose garden, Khosrow was seated in a golden throne. All of Persia's important nobles were there, and they all bowed and swore loyalty to Khosrow, recognizing him as Kay Kavus's heir. But there was one exception. Tus, son of Nozar, grandson of Manichir, and probably the second-best warrior in the kingdom after Rostam, turned his head away and left the ceremony in disgust. This act infuriated Gudars, who sent Give to go talk sense into Tus. When the two men went aside, Tus complained that no matter what great things Give and Gudar said about Kay Khosrow, he was still Afrasiab's grandson, and Tus did not want a ruler with such a close association to Turan. Accepting him as the future king would be like selecting a leopard to lead a flock of sheep. Tus also didn't like the underhanded way the nobles were going about raising Khosrow up. Ferabors was Kay Kavus's son, and the rightful heir to the throne. He was not related to the enemy, was just, strong, and also possessed the divine far. The argument got worse from there. Gudars gathered his 78 sons, including Give and his grandsons, and armed them for war. Tus led his own warriors and carried the Kaviani banner, the personal standard of all Persian kings descended from Feridun. It looked like a civil war was about to break out. But when Tus saw the huge host Gudars commanded, he realized that if the two sides began fighting, many of his Persian comrades would die. This would please no one except for Afrasiab, who would no doubt take advantage of the resulting mayhem and seize the Persian throne himself. So, instead of fighting, Tus and Gudars agreed to put away their weapons and went to speak with Kay Khosrow. Tus told the king that if his royal majesty was tired of ruling Iran, then he should pass the crown to his son Ferabors, instead of his grandson Khosrow. Ferabors, Tus insisted, was worthy. Gudars called Tus a fool, and said there was no one as just, wise, and humble as Kay Kavus's son Seyavash. Seyavash's own son had now miraculously appeared, and there was no one like him in all of Persia or Turan. Gudars told Kay Kavus to summon both Ferabors and Khosrow. The king must decide which of them should rule in his place. Kay Kavus demurred. He said he loved both young men and would not choose between them. Instead, he told the two Clements about an impenetrable castle located at Ardabil, a city in what is now northeastern Iran, near the border with Azerbaijan. The castle was at the center of a troublesome area and was protected by the evil spirit Ahriman. The evil spirit often stirred up so much unrest there that fire worshippers refused to live there. Kay Khosrow would support the claim of whoever sacked the Ardabil castle. Such a victory would show that they were favored by the Lord of the Sun and Moon, the Creator. Tus and Ferabors set out first and marched an army to Ardabil. As they approached the walls, Ahriman's trap was sprung. The surrounding air began to burn like fire, and the men began to cook within their suits of armor. they gave up hope and left Ardabil unconquered. Next, Khosrow was carried in a throne to Ardabil. Once there, he declared that by his far and the command of the Creator, he would tear the castle down. He had this declaration written on a letter. He attached the letter to the tip of a long spear, gave it to Give, and told him to take the letter down to the castle walls. Give set the spear against the walls. The letter disappeared, a loud roar was heard, and this was followed by a crash as the walls of Ardabil crumbled into dust. Khosrow's army then rushed forward, fired arrows over the castle remains, and killed Ahriman's Deves who dwelled within. When the dust cleared, Kay Khosrow ordered that a fire temple be built and brought in priests and sages to live there. After a year of looking after the new temple, Kay Khosrow returned to Kay Kavus's palace. All of the Persian nobles greeted him, and even Pherobors and Tus kissed the ground at his feet. Afterwards, Tus handed Khosrow his war drums, golden boots, and the Kaviani banner, regretting his earlier behavior and asking Khosrow to bestow them on someone else, whoever was worthy. With this action, Tus was trying to resign his generalship. But Khosrow was magnanimous and smiled. He gave the drums, boots, and banner back to Tus and said that there was no one else more worthy to bear them. Kay Khosrow then sat Khosrow on the royal throne and placed the crown on his head. The assembled nobles hailed Kay Khosrow as their king, and Kay Khosrow finally entered retirement. In the Shahnameh, this story ends with the following words. The world's way is to bestow with one hand and take away with the other. We suffer from its crooked turns, at times riding high and at times cast down. But if you are able to, live with a happy heart. You will not stay here long, so while you are here, give no place to sorrow. These words are an excellent yet incredibly fatalistic rationale of the tragedy of Seyavash. They seem to reflect the overall theme of the entire Persian epic genre, with similar sentiments echoed through the Shahnameh and other texts as well. And that's the end of this episode. Stay tuned for next time, and thank you for listening.